There are some challenges in this passage, and I would like to share a couple of thoughts in that respect. One thing concerns this uncharacteristic, violent act by a gentle, meek and mild Jesus. And my other thoughts raises perhaps some challenging questions about our own church to reflect on. Gentiles or not were allowed into the temple area as far as the outer court, but further. And it was there that temple sacrifices could be purchased from traders and money could be local currency acceptable to the temple authorities. It had been a chaotic, noisy and bustling marketplace. But then we find Jesus causing chaos and uproar. This violent outburst and outrage must have been dramatically felt by those who witnessed it, and in particular, the traders suffering damage and loss to their businesses all over the place, and driving out the cattle, the sheep, the doves, everyone out of the temple courts. And I guess it must have been crystal clear and widely reported what Jesus was saying and doing. Get these out of here. How dare you turn my Father's house into a market? Wow, what a scene to behold. But why was he so angry? See, I was always taught to keep one's temper in check or risk losing control of one's actions and emotions. I don't believe Jesus was out of control, but I suggest the moneylenders, the animal sellers and customers would have needed an authoritative, very firm, persuasive hand of encouragement to leave. The world does seem overwhelmed, does it not, by violence, conflict, terrorism, war, and ultimately those in power will end up having to sit down together to consider a peaceable solution. The suffering of innocent people in the meantime is both unacceptable and quite unimaginable. I am fundamentally a peace-loving person, but do we not react to threat, to bullying, aggression, and simply capitulate? Or do we take up arms to stand up against tyranny, to defend justice and freedom? Do we stand with, or do we stand by other countries' fights? Thinking of violence for a moment, remember when Jesus was invited to read the scripture at the synagogue in Nazareth. Luke recalls that everyone spoke well of Jesus and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. But when he went on to speak about the many hungry widows in Israel and how God used the prophet Elijah to feed just one non-widow amongst many, and how the prophet Elisha healed just one non-Jew of leprosy, the Jewish leadership and membership became so angry that they dragged this gracious Jesus outside, intending to throw him off the cliff. Jesus is really angry over the goings on in the temple in Jerusalem. There's a lot of cheating, overcharging of travellers who were duty-bound to perform their religious requirements at the temple at that time. It does seem that everyone is taking advantage and on the make. We may not like stock sellers and money changers capitalising on this opportunity, but what about the Jewish leadership and the authorities? Are they turning a blind eye to what's going on? Or are they just accepting, well, it's the world's way of supply? Or do they also enjoy a share of the gain from this marketplace? Jesus calls out in righteous anger, how dare you, how dare you turn my Father's house into a market? In the following verses Sue read, his disciples remember was written, zeal for your house will consume me. Zeal is dedication or enthusiasm for something. The religious leaders and authorities had zeal in bucketfuls for their protected and scripturally justified religious practices, which were constantly being challenged and confronted by Jesus. The temple towered above Jerusalem. It was the dynamic central focus of Jewish worship. Mark's Gospel refers to Isaiah's inclusive salvation. For my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. Which Mark follows up with Jeremiah's scathing commentary about performing religious duties whilst harbouring all kinds of sins, concluding with, has this house which bears my name become a den of robbers to you? I seem to recall an extremely wealthy minister in an extremely affluent church in America saying, I make no apology for my wealth. Even in the UK, there are some individual churches and regional associations that have extraordinary sums of cash safely locked away in the bank. Some years ago, I was asked to counsel was being torn apart by a major power struggle within. My response included having to point out the considerable assets at their disposal. Returning to the temple in Jerusalem, the old sacrificial system of worship was to be destroyed. But Jesus didn't come to be negative and destructive. No. Rather, he would make a new, accessible, and direct way to God for everyone. Jesus would be the temple that needed to be sacrificially destroyed, newly rebuilt in just 3 days. We must surely consider whether today's church has perhaps lost sight of its mission to make disciples for Jesus Christ, so to transform this fallen world. As a church, we used to have 2 services on a Sunday, and the church was pretty full. Many of the seeds sown in those comparatively heady days have long since fallen by the wayside. And we are in huge competition with the temple of 7 days a week, consumerism, social media and self-fulfillment. As a church, we do have a wide range of irons in the fire, which I see as a fresh expression of worship and outreach. Barriers are broken down as we share our extended facilities and halls here, as well as lots of individuals within our fellowship who serve in the local community, both here and out there. And the fantastic nativity scene on our front lawn was yet another fresh engagement that brought home, I think, the Christmas message to a very wide circle of people. I'm so looking forward to Easter, what Paul does as that scene begins to unfold. It does my heart good to note just how many hundreds are associated with this church every day of the week. Babies, children, teens, adults, and of course, the deeply respected, highly valued, indispensable, mature, full of wisdom, senior citizens like me. Thank you for that. As I mentioned, we do break down and perceptions of church by helping people feel comfortable within a church environment. That we are able to generate some valuable income to maintain those shared authorised facilities in good order. Being a welcoming, meaningful church to a very broad community of people does in turn open up considerable opportunities to engage from a Christian perspective. In effect, to share the love of God, to be the salt in this world. And not wishing to embarrass John, who, like the rest of us, is only slightly imperfect, his engagement in ministry is highly appreciated among many groups and individuals. Nonetheless, before I get too carried away about all the positive stuff that we embrace here, let me just flag up a few thoughts to reflect on. As one of our former ministers, Brian Tucker, once challenged, is Jesus in this? We can get quite animated championing our personal position, and sometimes quite divisive, using scripture to support a particular view. But is Jesus in this? Let's endeavour to listen to the quieter, faithful voices in our fellowship. Let's ensure we use all of our church rooms and facilities responsibly. We are called to reach out. We could, as some do, stand in the market square and shout, "Are you saved?" Or meet people where they are hurting, in love, without barriers or prejudice. I'm a huge fan of friendship evangelism, thus earning the right to share something of my Christian story. We are called to support those in ministry and outreach, often facing tough challenges both here and all over the world. Let's ensure we underpin everything in prayer. And finally, Jesus cleansed the temple in Jerusalem, and he will cleanse and renew this one too. And that may prove incredibly tough at times. So let's ensure we check and we double check with God at times. Jesus transforms the unholy into a church fit to make disciples. And that depth of sacrificial love will change the world. May we be the temple that Jesus transforms. We take a moment to reflect.